Your driver has a gun in his right pocket. Don't get in the car. Raymond Cole had served Adrian Moretti for 6 years. This morning, he stood beside the armored SUV 4 floors below, loaded a handgun with the calm of a professional, slid it into his coat pocket, and fixed his eyes on the exact spot where Adrian would stand in 8 minutes. Not his holster. His pocket. Close range. The only person who saw it was the maid holding a burgundy tie, a woman everyone in that building had already decided was invisible. She tightened the knot. Then she spoke. And everything changed. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The burgundy tie was too long on the first attempt. Claire Bennett pulled it apart and started over, her fingers moving through the familiar motions of a Windsor knot, the way she had learned in her second week as a housekeeper at the Moretti penthouse, not because anyone had ever taught her, but because she had watched the head housekeeper, Mrs. Fallon, do it enough times that her hands simply remembered. Mrs. Fallon had called in sick that morning, a Tuesday. Cold, gray, the kind of Chicago Tuesday that felt like the city was holding its breath. Claire had been summoned to the private dressings room on the 4th floor at 6:42 in the morning. The summons itself was unusual. In 11 months of working in this building, Claire had never once set foot in Adrian Moretti's dressing room. She had laundered his shirts. She had pressed his trousers with the kind of precision that Mrs. Fallon said could measure a man's dignity. She had folded pocket squares into perfect thirds and left them in the correct drawer. But she had never stood in the same room with him while he was still becoming the man the city feared. He was different at 6:42. Not smaller, exactly. Adrian Moretti was never small in any room he occupied. But there was something unfinished about him at that hour, something that the armored SUV and the bodyguards and the silence that spread through every hallway he walked had not yet attached itself to. He was just a man in a white dress shirt, watching the mirror with the kind of focused patience that only people who had survived things that would break other people seemed to carry. He did not look at her when she entered. "Mrs. Fallon," he said to the mirror. "She called in sick, sir. I'm Claire. I've been here 11 months. I handle the 3rd and 4th floor laundry, and I know who you are." He cut her off without raising his voice. "Can you tie a Windsor? Then do it." She stepped forward and picked up the tie from where it had been laid across the back of the chair. Burgundy, dark, almost brown in certain lights, the color of something old and serious. She began working it around his collar, and for a moment, the only sound in the room was the wind pressing against the windows and the distant noise of the city beginning to wake up. She was concentrating on the second pass of the tie when she looked up. Not at Adrian. Past him. Through the tall window behind his left shoulder, the one that looked out over the private driveway below. The black SUV was there, idling. Raymond Cole stood beside it the way he always stood, arms slightly out, back straight. The posture of a man who had been doing close protection work long enough. That readiness was just how his body rested, except his hands were moving. At first she thought he was checking his phone. The angle was wrong for that, though. He was facing slightly away from the building, his body angled so that what he was doing with his hands would not be visible from the entrance cameras. Claire noticed because she had 11 months of practice in noticing things from positions where she was not supposed to be watching. He was loading a gun, not holstering it, not checking a weapon already in his shoulder holster. Loading it, she could see the magazine going in. She could see his thumb working the slide. And then she watched him close his coat and push the weapon not into the holster where a trained security man would keep it accessible and controlled, but into the open right pocket. Her hand stopped moving. The knot was 3/4 finished. She could feel Adrian's eyes on her in the mirror, watching the pause. "Problem?" he asked. "No, sir." She started moving again, her fingers resuming the knot while her eyes stayed on the driveway. Raymond had turned now. He was looking at the building. No, he was looking at the rear passenger door of the SUV. His eyes kept returning to it the way a man returns to something he is waiting for. Not with the casual attentiveness of a driver who is ready to open a door. With the locked, calculating focus of a man measuring distance. The knot came together under her fingers without her consciously directing it. Her mind was somewhere else. Somewhere 4 floors below, doing arithmetic. If Raymond was armed in his pocket and not in his holster, it meant the weapon needed to be accessible quickly, without the deliberate motion of reaching inside a jacket. A pocket draw was faster. A pocket draw was for close range. The rear passenger door was close range. She finished the knot and straightened it against Adrian's chest. Her hands were still on his lapels when she looked at him directly in the mirror for the first time. She had brown eyes. Nobody had ever told her they were remarkable. But in that moment, holding the gaze of a man whose name made people in this city look at the floor, she did not look down. "Your driver has a gun in his right pocket," she said so quietly that the words barely disturbed the air between them. "Not his holster, his pocket. Don't get in the car." The silence that followed was the longest silence of Claire Bennett's 29 years of life. Adrian Moretti did not move. He did not flinch, did not look toward the window, did not pull away from her hands. His expression in the mirror remained exactly as it had been composed, measuring, unreadable. But something shifted in his eyes. Not fear. Something colder than fear. "Say that again," he said. "Raymond Cole is standing beside your SUV. He loaded a handgun less than a minute ago and put it in his right coat pocket. He's been watching the rear passenger door ever since. He's not watching the street. He's watching where you're going to stand. 1 beat, 2 beats. And you are telling me this because I saw it. People see things in this building and stay very quiet about them," he said. "That's generally considered the wise choice. So you understand what happens to you if you're wrong." She did. She understood it with a clarity that made her stomach drop about 3 inches and stay there. She understood it the way you understand certain things, not through experience, but through the simple math of cause and effect. The way you understand that stepping off a ledge means falling before you have ever stepped off anything. "I'm not wrong," she said. He studied her in the mirror for another moment. She held his gaze. She did not know why she held it. She had spent 11 months making herself invisible in this building, learning the schedules and the rhythms and the territories of every floor, learning where to be and where not to be, learning that the greatest skill a person in her position could have was the ability to seem like part of the furniture. And now she was standing here looking a man like Adrian Moretti directly in the eye and telling him that someone he trusted completely was waiting to put a bullet in him. Then he gripped her wrist, not violently, not painfully, but firmly enough that she understood the wrist was now his and not hers. "Go to the laundry room on 3, he said. "Lock yourself in. Do not open the door for anyone until I personally come and tell you it's safe." "Sir, I'm not negotiating." "Go." She went. The laundry room on the 3rd floor was narrow and smelled of pressed cotton and warm air from the machines, and it had a single interior bolt that she threw as soon as the door was closed behind her. She stood in the dark for a moment before she found the light switch, and then she stood in the bright humming light of the machines and thought about what she had just done. She had been in that building for 11 months. She had signed a non-disclosure agreement on her first day that had more paragraphs than her apartment lease. She had been paid better than any other housekeeping position she had ever held, which was 3. She sent most of it home to cover her younger sister Emily's medical expenses. Emily had been dealing with a condition that the doctors called manageable if they stayed on top of it, which meant expensive. Which meant Claire worked 6 days a week and did not go out very much and tried not to think too hard about what she was enabling by working in this particular building for this particular employer. She sat down on a plastic laundry basket and waited. 37 minutes. That was how long it was before she heard footsteps in the hallway outside, and then a knock, and then Adrian Moretti's voice saying, "Open the door." She opened it. He was still in the white dress shirt. The burgundy tie was still perfect. But the composed distance that had surrounded him like weather in the dressing room was cracked now, just slightly, just at the edges, and what showed through was something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like a man who had just looked at something he had trusted for a very long time and seen it completely differently. "Raymond has been taken into custody," he said. "My security team intercepted him before anyone was hurt. I'm glad." "Are you?" It wasn't really a question. "Yes." He looked at her for a moment in the doorway. Not the way he had looked at her in the dressing room mirror, with calculation and the slow weight of a man deciding. More directly than that. More like he was seeing her for the first time, which in a certain real sense he was. "Come upstairs," he said. "I need you to hear what they found." He did not ask. He told her. But the way he told her was different from the way he had told her to go to the laundry room, and she noticed the difference, even if she couldn't have named exactly what it was. What they found in Raymond Cole's car was laid out on the kitchen table in Adrian's private residence like evidence in a case, because that is exactly what it was. A burner phone with a Chicago number she didn't recognize. Vehicle registration documents that were not for the SUV Raymond drove but for a similar vehicle. The paperwork forged with enough care to pass all casual inspection. Folded inside a jacket pocket in the back seat, an envelope. The envelope contained $46,000 in banded cash and a single index card. The index card had an address, a warehouse on the south side. And below the address, 2 words, deliver intact. Claire looked at the index card for a long time. He wasn't supposed to kill you at the car, she said. No, Adrian said. He was supposed to get you inside the vehicle and drive you somewhere. Alive. Yes, they needed you alive for something specific. The access codes to my transport company's dispatch systems. Every vehicle, every route, every contact. It would take months to reconstruct from scratch if someone deleted the current database and started their own operation. He said it flatly, without embarrassment, the way a man states a fact about a building or a road. Someone wanted to walk into my operation from the inside. They needed the keys. And Raymond was going to hand you over. Raymond has worked for my family for 6 years. He paused. Has worked. Had worked. He looked at the index card. 23 years between the two of us, my father and I. And he put a gun in his pocket this morning and waited by the car. The silence after that had a different quality than the silence in the dressing room. That silence had been tense, charged, waiting for a decision. This silence was heavier. The silence of something already decided, already done, impossible to take back. Claire watched his face. He was not asking her for sympathy. He would not have recognized an offer of it if she had made one. But there was something happening in the space behind his eyes that looked like a man reassembling his understanding of the last 6 years. And she thought that process probably felt like being knocked downstairs in a building you had thought you knew perfectly. Why did you tell me, he asked, without preamble, without leading up to it. His eyes came to her directly. You could have looked out the window and looked away. You could have finished the tie and walked out. No one would have known what you saw. Why? She thought about how to answer. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because the answer was the kind of thing that sounded simple when it was real and sounds rehearsed when it's performed. Because seeing something wrong and staying quiet about it makes me part of it, she said. I'm not willing to be part of it. He considered this. She could not tell what he was doing with it. Men like Adrian Moretti did not become what they were by taking people at face value, and she understood that. She had said something honest and real, and she knew that to him, honest and real things from people he didn't know were just a different kind of information to evaluate. You could have left, he said. You saw it through the window. You could have walked out of the room, gone home, called in sick tomorrow, and disappeared, and spent the rest of my life wondering what happened to you in that car, wondering if I could have said something. She shook her head. That's not a trade I was willing to make. Something shifted in his expression. Not much. A millimeter, maybe. The kind of shift that would be invisible on someone whose face Claire hadn't spent the last 20 minutes studying. He picked up the index card and held it between 2 fingers, looking at it. The threat isn't just Raymond, he said. Someone gave him those instructions. Someone planned this carefully enough to have a warehouse ready, to have a second vehicle prepared, to have those specific account codes as a target. This was organized over time by someone who knew my schedule, my habits, and my security protocols. Someone inside your organization, Claire said, or someone with access to it, which is almost the same thing. He looked at her. Yes, almost. He set the card down. He was quiet for a moment in that way that she was already recognizing as his particular kind of quiet, not the quiet of a man with nothing to say, but of a man who was deciding how much of what he had to say belonged in any given conversation. I'm going to make you an offer, he said, and I want you to think about it before you answer, because I don't make offers twice. Claire waited. You have an unusual skill, he said, not the observation. You saw something this morning that 3 trained security personnel who were all awake and alert did not see. You read Raymond's intentions from a 4th-floor window at a distance that most people would not have noticed a face at, let alone a handgun. I pay attention to what people do with their hands, she said. Why? Because people control their faces when they're hiding something. They think about their expressions. They don't think about their hands. He was listening to her the way she imagined. He listened to people he considered worth listening to. Fully, without performing attentiveness. The real thing. I need someone close to me who does what you do, he said. Someone who watches. Not with weapons, not with authority, just with eyes. Someone the people around me don't notice watching them because they've already decided who that person is. A maid, she said. An executive aide. Different title, same invisibility to the people who underestimate titles. He paused. I know this is asking you to step into something dangerous. I'm aware that I don't have the right to expect you to do that. You don't, she agreed. which is why I'm offering you a choice. You can take what you've already done this morning and walk out of this building with a very substantial amount of money and references that will open any door in this city. Or you can stay and do this work and be protected while you're doing it. Protected by the same people who didn't notice Raymond loading his gun? He not quite, but almost. Fair point, he said. She looked at the evidence on the table. The burner phone, the cash. The index card with the 2 words on it, deliver intact, as if Adrian Moretti were a shipment, a package. Something to be relocated rather than a human being. I have conditions, she said. You have conditions, he repeated. I will not carry a weapon. I'm not trained and I won't pretend to be. If you need someone with a gun, hire someone with a gun. That's not me. All right. And you will never ask me to harm anyone. Not to point someone toward harm, not to set someone up, not to create a situation where someone gets hurt based on what I observe. I will tell you what I see. What you do with it has to be your decision, not mine. He was quiet for a moment. Those are not typical terms for this kind of work. I'm not a typical person for this kind of work, she said. I'm a housekeeper who can read people. If you want to hire someone who will do everything you say without conditions, there are people better suited for that. If you want someone who will actually tell you the truth about what she sees, even when it's not what you want to hear, I'm available. Another ponger. All right, he said, those are your terms. I'll honor them. She looked at him. If you break either of them, I walk. No discussion, no negotiation, I walk, I understand. Do you? Yes, he said. And something in the way he said it made her believe him, even knowing what she knew about who he was and what that belief was worth. She looked at the table one more time, at the index card, at the 2 words. Whoever planned this, she said, they know your schedule. They know your security protocols. They knew Raymond could be bought. This wasn't built in a week. No. Which means they're still close to you. Whatever you are planning to do today at City Hall, whoever you are planning to meet, you should assume that person already knows your information was compromised. He looked at her. You worked that out quickly. I've been standing in this room for 20 minutes, she said. I've been thinking. He picked up the index card one more time and looked at it. Then he set it down, face down, the address side up, the 2 words facing the table. You start tomorrow, he said. Mrs. Fallon will be informed. Mrs. Fallon is going to be confused. Mrs. Fallon works for me. She'll manage her confusion quietly. He looked at the window. Outside, the gray Tuesday was deciding whether it wanted to rain. You should know something. What you did this morning telling me what you saw, there will be people in this building who see that as dangerous. People who preferred that you stayed invisible. I know. You may have already made enemies you haven't met yet. I know that too. He studied her one more time, as if he was making a final decision about her. And the decision was something he wasn't quite used to having to make. What's your sister's name, he asked. She blinked. How do you know about my sister? Employee files. Medical coverage exception. I sign the payroll adjustments personally. He paused. It is not a coincidence that your salary here is higher than what your experience would typically command. She absorbed this. Her name is Emily. How is she? Managing, Claire said. The word tasted like what it was, the polite, exhausted shorthand for something that was not all right, but was not yet catastrophic. She's managing. He nodded. He did not offer anything about Emily, did not make a promise, did not say something generous and obvious that would have cost him nothing. She found that she respected that. It would have been easy to say something, easy and cheap, and she would have known it was cheap. Tomorrow morning, he said. 7 o'clock. The East Conference Room. She nodded. I'll be there. She walked to the door and then stopped. Because something had been sitting at the edge of her mind since the kitchen table, and she had not quite let herself look at it directly until now. Mr. Moretti, he turned Raymond. The $46,000. The warehouse, she paused. Someone gave him all of that. Someone recruited him, paid him, planned this. And this morning, when you were standing in that dressing room completely calm, while I told you your driver was going to hand you to strangers, she stopped. How long have you known that someone close to you is working against you? The silence that followed was the longest silence of their conversation. And in it, Claire understood something that the morning's events had not quite spelled out until now. She understood that Adrian Moretti had already known something was wrong. Not the specifics, not Raymond, not the warehouse, not the index card, but the feeling. The long, cold, patient feeling of a man who has learned to sleep lightly because he knows the house is not as safe as it looks. Long enough, he said, that I'd stopped being surprised. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she left. In the elevator going down, she realized her hands were shaking. Not much, just enough that She pressed them flat against the sides of her thighs and breathed slowly and waited for the shaking to stop. It took 4 floors. She had just agreed to stay close to one of Chicago's most dangerous men in a building full of people who had already proved that loyalty here was a commodity. She had traded in visibility, the only real protection she'd had for 11 months, for visibility, for a title, for terms that a man like Adrian Moretti might honor or might not. And she was standing in an elevator going down with $46,000 worth of someone's plan, sitting on a kitchen table above her, and a burgundy tie in her memory, and the knowledge that the driver who had opened her car door on 3 different rainy mornings had been carrying a gun in his pocket the whole time. She pressed her hands harder against her thighs. She thought about Emily. She thought about the index card, deliver intact, as if he were cargo. She thought about Raymond Cole standing beside that SUV, perfectly composed, waiting, and the way she had nearly not looked out the window at all. She thought, I was there. I was the only one in the right place, at the right angle, at the right moment. And then she thought, the thing that had been underneath all of it since the moment she first whispered into the dressing room mirror, what if next time I'm not there? The elevator opened on the lobby. Claire Bennett walked out of it into the cold gray Tuesday morning, and she did not look back and she did not slow down. And in 11 hours, the only thing that had changed about her was everything. 3 days after Raymond Cole was arrested, Claire Bennett walked into the East Conference Room at 7 o'clock in the morning, wearing a gray blazer she had bought the night before with 2 weeks of saved grocery money. And nobody in that room looked up from their phones. That was the first thing she noticed. There were 6 men already seated at the long table when she arrived. She recognized 4 of them from 11 months of passing through hallways with laundry carts, senior lieutenants, men who moved through the building with the kind of authority that does not need to announce itself. The other 2 she did not recognize, which meant they had come from somewhere outside the penthouse, which was already a detail worth noting. Not one of them acknowledged her entrance. She sat in the chair closest to the wall, the one slightly outside the geometry of the table, and she opened the leather notebook Adrian had left on her desk the previous afternoon, with a yellow sticky note on the cover that said simply, write everything down. She uncapped her pen and she waited. Adrian came in at 7:04. The room changed when he entered. Not dramatically. Just the way a room changes when barometric pressure shifts something invisible and total. Something your body registers before your mind catches up. The men straightened. The phones disappeared. 2 of them who had been leaning back in their chairs brought themselves forward. He sat at the head of the table, looked at the assembled faces once, and said, we have a problem that is larger than Raymond. Nobody spoke. This, Claire was learning, was the particular silence of men who were deciding how much they already knew versus how much they were willing to reveal. 3 shipments diverted in the last 30 days, Adrian continued. Not lost. Diverted. Different routes, different drivers, different cargo, but all 3 ended up somewhere that was not on any manifest I signed. He let that sit for a moment. Someone is moving freight through my network without my authorization. And they've been doing it long enough that they're comfortable. A man named Vitelli, who sat 2 chairs to Adrian's right and had the particular quality of stillness that comes from long practice at being in rooms where the wrong word costs more than money, leaned forward. Could be the drivers acting independently. Pocket money. 3 separate drivers. 3 separate routes. Same final destination. Adrian looked at him. That's not pocket money. That's an operation. Vitelli nodded slowly and said nothing more. Claire wrote. Vitelli answered too quickly, then stopped too completely. Daniel Russo sat at the far end of the table. She had seen him before. He was the kind of man who occupied a room comfortably, who laughed at the right moments, and made other people feel included by doing so, who remembered names and used them. In another life, in another building, he might have been the person everyone genuinely liked. Here he was Adrian's longest-serving senior advisor. 20 years. The kind of tenure that becomes its own form of authority. He was the one who broke the silence after Vitelli. We should pull the manifests from the last quarter, Russo said. He had a good voice. Measured, reasonable, the voice of a man who has learned that sounding calm makes other people believe you are right. Cross-reference them against the driver logs. If there's a pattern, it'll show up. Already done, Adrian said. The manifests are clean. Russo spread his hands. Then whoever did this had access to the manifest system. Yes, Adrian said they did. Another silence. This one tasted different from the first. The first had been cautious. This one was watchful. Claire wrote, Russo suggested manifest check, knowing manifests are already clean. He knew they would be clean. She was not certain. She wrote it anyway, because certainty was not the point. The point was the pattern. Patterns were not made of certainties. They were made of small moments that did not quite fit, accumulated until they did. After the meeting, she followed Adrian back to his private office. He was reading through a folder before the door had fully closed behind her. "Vitelli," she said. He looked up. He volunteered the simplest explanation, drivers acting independently before you had given enough information to evaluate it. He already knew the answer wasn't that simple, but he offered it anyway. "Vitelli has been nervous since Raymond," Adrian said. "That's not unusual. Most of them are nervous." "Nervous people don't offer explanations," Claire said. "They ask questions. They want to know what you know before they commit to a position." Vitelli committed before he had enough information to make it safe to do so. Adrian looked at her for a moment. "And Russo?" She hesitated. She was new to this. She knew what she had seen, and she trusted what she had seen. But there was a version of this conversation where she pushed too hard and named someone Adrian would defend instinctively, and the trust she had built in 3 days came apart before it had properly formed. She went ahead anyway. "Russo knew the manifest would be clean before you told him," she said. "He suggested checking them because he knew you would come back empty-handed, and the meeting would end without any conclusion. It bought time and it looked cooperative." Adrian set the folder down. "Daniel Russo has been with my family since before I took over from my father," he said. "He is one of 3 people in this organization who know every financial account, every external contact, and every—" "I know," Claire said. "That's exactly why I'm telling you." The silence that followed was different from any of the morning silences. This one had an edge to it. Not anger, or not only anger. Something more complicated. The specific discomfort of a man who was hearing something he had already half-thought and was hoping someone else would tell him was wrong. "I'm not saying he did anything," she said. "I'm saying his behavior in that room was not the behavior of a man who was hearing new information. That's all I can tell you. What you do with it is yours." Adrian was quiet for a long time. "Don't repeat this to anyone," he said finally. "Obviously." He looked at her. "Thank you." It was the first time he had said those 2 words to her, without them being attached to a condition or a task. She registered that, filed it away, and left. The next 6 days were a different kind of education. She just watched the mountains. Claire had spent 11 months learning how a building works from the inside, the rhythms of it, the temperatures, the places where people were careful, and the places where they were not. She had that the truth of any environment lives in its margins, in the spaces between the official version of events and the actual version. She had learned this the way anyone learns it who has spent years in service work, by being in the room but not officially being seen. Now she was seen, and that changed everything. She accompanied Adrian to 3 meetings in 4 days. A financing discussion with a property developer who sweated through his collar and laughed too loudly, and whose left foot bounced continuously under the table. Genuine fear, she determined, not concealment. A dispute arbitration between 2 dock supervisors over stolen cargo, where the man who spoke most confidently about his innocence kept his arms crossed across his chest and his chin down in the universal posture of a person making themselves physically smaller. And a lunch meeting with a city logistics contractor named Halverson, who was smooth and pleasant and made eye contact with everyone in the room with the practiced ease of someone who had learned that eye contact reads as honesty even when it is not. Halverson interested her. She wrote about him that night. His hands were the tell. His face was professional, controlled, the face of a man who had been in rooms like that one many times. But his hands, when Adrian mentioned the diverted shipments, casually, just a reference. Not an accusation, his hands went to the table and pressed flat, fingers spread, the physical equivalent of bracing. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then his hands relaxed and he continued the conversation without any visible disruption. But she had seen it. She added Halverson to her notes with a question mark and kept watching. On the 7th day, Adrian told her they were going to the Chicago Opera House. "A charity gala," he said in the tone of a man explaining something he would prefer not to be doing. "Vincent Caruso will be there. We have a conversation scheduled." She looked at him. "Caruso. You know the name. Everyone in this city knows the name. He has proposed an alliance. Freight contracts, specifically his distribution network, combined with my transport infrastructure. On paper, it would benefit both operations substantially. And off paper? Off paper, Caruso has been trying to absorb my territories for 4 years, and this proposal would give him access to systems and contacts he does not currently have." He paused. "Which is why we're having the conversation in public, at an event with 200 witnesses. where the cost of bad behavior is prohibitive. She thought about this. Who else knows about this meeting? He looked at her steadily. Everyone in that conference room 3 days ago, including Russo. She did not say it. She thought it, and he knew she thought it, and they both left it in the air between them where it was most honest. The opera house that evening was exactly what she had expected it to be, an elaborate, beautiful performance of people pretending to be at ease. She stood 3 feet behind Adrian's left shoulder in a dark dress that Mrs. Fallon had helped her select from the emergency wardrobe the household kept for occasions. She was not Adrian's date. She was not introduced to anyone as anything. She was simply present, in the specific way that an aide is present, close enough to be useful, far enough to be overlooked. This was her element. She understood this better than any training she had received. Caruso was a large man with good manners, and the kind of generosity that comes from never having had to worry about whether you can afford to be generous. He embraced Adrian the way men of that world embrace, with one hand on the shoulder, pulling close, and the shake of the other hand functioning as much as a claim of territory as a greeting. He smiled at Claire for exactly 1.5 seconds before his eyes returned to Adrian, which told her that he had categorized her and decided she was not relevant. She smiled back at the space he had already vacated with his attention, and she began watching his security. There were 4 of them. She identified them within 90 seconds, the slightly too alert postures, the earpieces on 2 of them, the way they positioned themselves relative to Caruso without looking like they were positioning themselves relative to Caruso. Professional. Trained. 3 of them she would have found unremarkable. The 4th one checked his watch. Not once. Not the casual glance of a man keeping track of his evening. He checked it at 9:17, at 9:20, at 9:23, 3 minutes apart each time. The same wrist, the same motion. The eyes dropped for exactly the same duration each time. A countdown or a check-in. Either way, a man waiting for something to happen. She looked at the curtains at the back of the private box where Caruso had arranged the meeting. Heavy velvet curtains, floor to ceiling, separating the box from the service corridor that ran behind the upper tier of the opera house. The curtains were still. Then they were not. It was the smallest movement, the kind that the eye edits out when you are looking at something else. A shift of fabric at the bottom left, the way curtains move when something passes behind them, something that disturbs the air at floor level. Someone was on the other side of the curtain. She had 3 seconds to decide. She thought about the index card, deliver intact. She thought about Raymond Cole and the way he had looked at the rear passenger door of the SUV. She thought about the 4th security man and his watch. She leaned toward Adrian. Someone is on the other side of that curtain, she said. Her voice was barely above breath. Move now. Adrian did not hesitate. She never forgot that he did not hesitate. He had heard her once before, and she had been right. And whatever calculation lived inside him processed that history in under a second, and he moved, pulling her with him behind the stone partition at the side of the box, just as the curtain burst open and a figure came through it. The sound was enormous in an enclosed space. Shouting, the crash of overturned furniture, the specific controlled chaos of trained security men doing their work. It lasted, she estimated, about 45 seconds. Then it was quiet. Caruso was pressed against the far wall, his good manners stripped away to reveal the much simpler animal that lived underneath every man in that room. His security had the intruder on the floor. Adrian's men had materialized from positions she had not identified, which was instructive and slightly alarming. Caruso looked across the room at Adrian. I had nothing to do with that, he said. His voice was shaking. She noted this carefully. A man who had arranged an attack on his own negotiating partner would not shake. He would be controlled. Because control is how you survive the thing you planned. Caruso was not controlled. He was frightened, which meant he had not planned this. Which meant someone had planned it for him. Or rather, planned it around him. An attack that endangered both of them. An attack designed to make them blame each other. She pulled out her notebook in the car going back to the penthouse and wrote at the top of a fresh page, third party. Someone who needs Adrian and Caruso to destroy each other. She underlined it twice. In the penthouse, after the security debrief, after the calls that Adrian made and received for the better part of 2 hours, she sat across from him in the kitchen, the same kitchen, where the evidence from Raymond's car had been laid out on the table a week before, and she waited. He came in eventually. He poured water and didn't drink it and set the glass down and looked at the window. Caruso is not behind any of this, she said. He said, I know what he said. He's telling the truth. He was as surprised as you were. More surprised, actually, he didn't have anyone whispering in his ear before it happened. She paused. The attack was designed to provoke both of you. If his security had shot first and asked questions after, you'd both be out of that room with blood on your hands and a war starting before anyone knew the real source. Adrian turned from the window. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to understand, was his version of impressed, which did not look the way impressed usually looks. It was quieter, more contained, expressed primarily through the degree to which his full attention concentrated on you. You worked that out at the gala, he said. I worked part of it out at the gala. The rest came together in the car. How? The man who came through the curtain, did your security identify him? Not yet. He had an earpiece, she said. Left ear. Very small, I almost missed it. Someone was talking to him, giving him timing. But Caruso's man with the watch, he was on a 3-minute check-in, not a command structure. He was waiting for a signal to do something specific, something timed. The two operations were coordinated but separate. 2 separate units, Adrian said slowly. One to create the attack. One inside Caruso's security to ensure the response went in a particular direction. Someone has reached into both your organizations, she said. Whoever this is, they have been inside both of your operations long enough to place people and build timing. The silence that followed lasted a long time. I haven't slept through a full night in 4 years, Adrian said. He didn't say it to her specifically. He said it in the way people sometimes say things out loud that they have been keeping inside for long enough that the weight of them finally needs somewhere to go. Every relationship I have in this city is a calculation. Who needs me? Who fears me? Who profits when I'm gone? She said nothing. Sometimes nothing is the more honest response. I trust Daniel Russo, he said. I have trusted him since I was 26 years old. My father trusted him before me. She still said nothing. If what you're suggesting is right, he said, then he has been building this for years, planning it carefully. And every time I sat across a table from him and talked about loyalty and trust in the way this organization treats its own people, all of it was performance. I don't know for certain that it's Russo, she said carefully. I know his behavior in that conference room was wrong. I know that the person behind this has deep access to your schedule and your systems. I know those 2 things overlap. That's all I know. He looked at her. If it were your decision, I wouldn't confront him, she said immediately. That's the instinct, but it ends the investigation. If he knows you're watching, he covers his tracks, and you never find the full picture. You audit him. Quietly, completely, without his knowledge. You look at his accounts, his communications, every access log with his credentials. You build the case before you make the move. And if the audit finds nothing, then he's innocent, and I'm wrong, and you never have to tell him any of this happened. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then, you're not afraid of being wrong. I'm very afraid of being wrong, she said. But I'm more afraid of what happens if I'm right, and I stay quiet about it. He nodded. He picked up the glass of water, drank half of it, and set it down. There is something I need to tell you, he said. She waited. The offer I made you when this started, staying close, observing, reporting what you see. I told you I would honor your terms. He paused. I want you to know that the money for your sister's medical treatment, Emily, I can make those arrangements without any conditions. It's not attached to your work here. It was never meant to be. She looked at him across the table. Her first instinct was to say no. Her second instinct was to question the offer, to look for the string attached, to find the place where the generosity became leverage. She was very familiar with the architecture of that particular construction. But she watched his hands. They were still. Not the stillness of a man suppressing something. The stillness of a man saying a thing that is simply true. Don't, she said. Don't what? Don't make it a gift. If Emily's treatment gets paid for, it happens through a documented payment structure that I can account for. That doesn't put me in debt to you in ways that aren't explicit. She held his gaze. Because the moment I accept something I can't account for, I become exactly the kind of person who stays quiet when they should speak. And that's the only thing about me that's worth anything to you right now. He stared at her. Then he said very quietly, you are the most inconvenient person I have ever employed. Good, she said. You don't need convenient. You've had convenient. Look where it's gotten you. Something crossed his face that she was fairly certain was the closest thing to a genuine smile she was going to see from Adrian Moretti in the foreseeable future. The audit will begin tomorrow, he said, through a firm outside the organization. Nothing internal. Good. And Russo attends the board review on Friday. Can you be there? Watch him. I'm always watching, she said. She left the penthouse at just past midnight. In the elevator going down, she checked her phone. There was a text from an unknown number. 7 words, we should talk. Detective L. Mitchell, CPD. She stared at it for the time it took the elevator to reach the lobby. Then she put the phone in her pocket and walked out into the night. She did not reply, not yet. But she held onto the card, the physical one, which she had been carrying in the inner pocket of the gray blazer, since a woman in a dark coat had pressed it into her hand in the parking structure of the Opera House as the security situation was being resolved, in the particular way that trained law enforcement agents managed to pass objects to people in chaotic environments without anyone else noticing. Detective Laura Mitchell, CPD, a cell number. She had noticed the handoff. She had not mentioned it to Adrian. This was the first thing she had not told him, and she walked home through the cold Chicago night, carrying it like a stone in her chest, trying to decide whether the weight of it was guilt or simply the unbearable complexity of a situation in which the truth belonged to more than one person, and there was not yet a version of honesty that served everyone it needed to serve. She did not sleep well. In the morning, she made coffee and sat at her kitchen table and thought about what she was exactly in this situation. She was not Adrian Moretti's employee. She was not his ally in any sense that would survive legal scrutiny. She was not an informant. She hadn't agreed to anything with Detective Mitchell. She was not a bystander. She had put herself directly in the center of something that had been building long before she had ever tied a Windsor knot in a fourth-floor dressing room. She decided a witness. The question was to what and for whom. The Friday board review was held in the executive conference room on the penthouse floor, and Claire arrived early enough to choose her position. She sat in the corner chair again, the one slightly outside the official geometry of the table, the one that was not attached to a name card or a presentation packet. 3 of the men from the previous meeting were there, plus 4 others she had not seen before. Financial people. The kind whose clothes were expensive and whose eyes were careful. Russo arrived last. This was deliberate, she could tell, because he was not breathless or apologetic, which is how people who are accidentally late arrive. He was composed and smiling, and he set his leather folder on the table with the ease of a man who has decided that the room is already his before he enters it. Adrian entered 30 seconds after. The meeting covered freight loss numbers, insurance claims, quarterly reports. It was, on its surface, completely ordinary. The kind of meeting that could have been happening in any legitimate shipping company in the country. Claire watched Russo. His performance was excellent. She gave it credit where credit was due. It was the performance of a man who had been doing this for 20 years and knew every variation of the dance. He deferred to Adrian at the correct moments. He challenged mildly, reasonably, at 2 points that made him look engaged rather than threatening. He praised 2 of the financial reports in specific enough terms to sound like he had read them carefully. But his ring was wrong. He wore a signet ring on his right hand that she had seen at every meeting, heavy gold, the kind of ring that announces itself. Today he was wearing a different ring, smaller, on the inside of the index finger where it would not be immediately visible. A band with an embossed design she could not make out from her position. She waited until the break between agenda items when people stood and stretched and refilled coffee, and she moved casually around the side of the room, carrying her notebook, stopping to look at the window the way anyone might stop to look at a window. And from that angle, for 2 seconds, she could see the ring clearly. The emblem was a stylized letter C overlaid on an architectural image she recognized from a newspaper profile she had read 6 months ago about Chicago's private club culture. The profile had included a photograph of the club's entrance. The club was owned by Vincent Caruso. She was back in her corner before the break ended. Her handwriting was very small and very controlled when she wrote it. Russo Caruso Club ring. Right-hand index finger hidden from table view, not the usual ring. She underlined it. Then she drew a small box around it. She did not look at Russo for the rest of the meeting. She did not need to. After the room cleared, after the last of the financial men had gathered their folders and their careful eyes and left, after Russo had shaken Adrian's hand with the warm, practiced grip of a man saying goodbye to someone he planned to see again, soon Claire stayed seated. Adrian stood at the window. "Well," he said. "He's wearing a membership ring from Vincent Caruso's private club," she said, hidden on his hand, not his usual ring. The sound Adrian made was very quiet, almost not a sound at all. He was signaling, she said, or wearing a loyalty mark. Either way, the connection is real. He has direct ties to Caruso's inner circle. "I've known Daniel Russo for 20 years, Adrian said, to the window. "Not to her, I know. He came to my father's funeral. He sat in the second row, he cried." "I know," she said more gently. "And the whole time?" "We don't know the whole time yet. That's what the audit is for." She paused. 20 years is a long time. But it's also a long time to build something. If Russo has been planning this, really planning it, not just opportunistically reacting, he needed 20 years to get to the position where it was possible. Adrian turned from the window. The expression on his face was one she did not yet have a name for, and she thought it might be the specific grief that belongs only to betrayal, not anger, not hurt exactly, but the terrible revision of memory. The going back through everything you thought was real and finding the other thing inside it. How do you do it, he asked. Watch people that carefully and still. He stopped. Still what? Trust any of them. She thought about that honestly, the way she tried to think about all things that mattered. I don't trust any of them, she said. I watch them. Trust comes later if the watching earns it. She paused. You trusted Raymond because he was familiar. You trusted Russo because the years accumulated. Neither of those is the same as trust. They're just time. He looked at her. Do you trust me, he asked. It was the most direct question he had ever asked her. She felt the weight of it, the particular vulnerability of a man like Adrian Moretti asking a question like that, which must have cost him more than she could measure. She answered him honestly. I trust what I've observed, she said. You heard me about Raymond. You kept your word about my conditions. You didn't act on Russo without evidence. She held his gaze. Ask me again in 6 months. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then his phone rang, and the moment ended, and he turned to answer it, and she gathered her notebook and her pen and her thoughts and walked to her office, and she closed the door, and she sat down, and she took Detective Mitchell's card out of the inner pocket of the gray blazer and set it on the desk in front of her. She looked at it for a very long time. Then she picked up her phone. She typed tomorrow morning, public place, my choice of location. And she sent it. And she set the phone face down on the desk. And she sat with the silence of a woman who had just committed herself to something that could not be uncommitted. And she breathed through it until the silence stopped feeling like falling and started feeling like the ground. Outside, the city continued its enormous ordinary life, completely unaware that a former housekeeper was sitting in an office on the 4th floor of a building it mostly feared, holding the thread that connected 3 forces that were all moving toward the same collision point, trying to figure out how to keep anyone innocent from getting caught in the impact. The burgundy tie was in the dressing room, 4 doors down the hall. She could not see it from where she was sitting, but she thought about it anyway. The moment her hands had stopped moving, the moment she had looked out that window and seen Raymond Cole making a decision that would have destroyed 2 lives and probably more. She thought about the words she had used to explain it to Adrian afterward. Because seeing something wrong and staying silent would make me part of it. She still believed that. She was still going to act on it. She just hadn't understood yet, on that Tuesday morning, how many things she was going to see and how much harder it was going to get to know the right thing to do about all of them. The coffee shop Claire chose for her meeting with Detective Mitchell was a place called Hendrix, on the corner of West Monroe and South Canal, the kind of neighborhood spot that filled up with construction workers and paralegal assistants at 7 in the morning and emptied out by 8:30 when everyone moved on with their days. She chose it because it was loud enough that conversations did not carry, small enough that she could see every entrance from any seat, and far enough from both the penthouse and the nearest precinct that neither side of her life would accidentally walk through the door. She arrived 12 minutes early. She ordered black coffee and sat with her back to the wall. Mitchell arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, which told Claire something useful right away. A detective who arrives precisely on time to a meeting called by a civilian source is a detective who has been there for a while already, who walked the block, who identified the exits, who is now performing punctuality as a form of reassurance. Claire respected the professionalism even as she noted it. Mitchell was 43 or 44, Claire estimated. She had the kind of face that had been pretty once and had become something better with time-defined, direct, the face of a woman who had stopped caring what rooms thought of her and started caring what rooms were hiding. She sat down without taking off her coat, which meant she was not planning to stay long, which meant she had somewhere to be after this, which meant this meeting was part of a larger structure that Claire was not yet seeing. You took your time responding, Mitchell said. I had things to consider. Fair. Mitchell wrapped her hands around the coffee cup a server had materialized beside her. I'm going to be direct with you because I think that's the only version of this conversation that works. We've been building a case against Adrian Moretti for 18 months. Freight diversion, tax concealment, municipal contract manipulation. We have a framework. What we don't have is something that connects the current activity to the decision-making level. You want testimony, Claire said. I want evidence. Testimony that supports evidence. Mitchell looked at her steadily. You are in a position that nobody in this investigation has ever been in. You are close to him. You are trusted. And you called me, which means you already know that what you're sitting in the middle of is bigger than one man and one organization. Claire turned the coffee cup in her hands. Who else are you looking at? Municipal contracting. City logistics. There's a technology company called CivicFlow Systems that has been winning public contracts at a rate that shouldn't be statistically possible. Every contract they've won has been in categories that overlap directly with Moretti's freight network. Mitchell paused. CivicFlow has access to city traffic systems, dispatch coordination, camera networks. On paper, they maintain the infrastructure. In practice, whoever controls CivicFlow controls the city's movement. Claire was very still. She thought about the opera house. The fourth security man checking his watch on a 3-minute cycle. The timing of the attack precise, coordinated between 2 separate units. The way Adrian's security convoy had moved through the city a dozen times in the last 2 weeks. Always on routes that CivicFlow's contracts covered. You think CivicFlow is connected to whoever is running this, Claire said. I think CivicFlow is the mechanism, Mitchell said. Traffic signals, camera blackouts, dispatch interference. Whoever controls it can direct movement in this city the way you direct pieces on a board. Make a convoy take a specific route. Create a gap in surveillance at a specific moment. Redirect emergency response away from a specific area. Claire set her coffee down. Who owns CivicFlow, she asked. Officially, a holding company registered in Delaware. Unofficially, Mitchell stopped. She looked at Claire carefully. This is where the conversation gets interesting. Because unofficially, the ownership trail leads through a sequence of shell structures that all eventually connect to a man who is currently sitting inside Moretti's organization, attending his board meetings, and has been in a position of trust for 20 years, Claire said. Mitchell looked at her. Russo, Claire said. The silence between them had a specific quality, the silence of 2 people who have arrived at the same place from different directions and are looking at each other across the space where they met. How long have you known? Mitchell asked. I've suspected for 8 days. I confirmed the Caruso connection 4 days ago. Claire looked at the detective. He's been building this for a long time. Russo recruited Raymond Cole. He placed someone inside Caruso's security, and he has been using CivicFlow to control the operational environment. Every attack, every diversion, every moment of pressure, he could coordinate all of it through that system. And the goal, provoke a war between Moretti and Caruso. Let them destroy each other or weaken each other enough that the survivor can be taken down through other means. Then walk into the legitimate transport infrastructure of both organizations and run it himself. She paused. He needed Adrian alive long enough to hand over the access codes. That was what Raymond was for. Mitchell sat back in her chair. She was quiet for a moment in the way of a person recalibrating. You worked all of that out in 8 days, she said. I've had access to the right rooms, Claire said. And I pay attention to things that other people have decided aren't worth paying attention to. We've been building this for 18 months. You've been building it from the outside, Claire said. Not unkindly, just accurately. Mitchell looked at her for a long time. I need you to understand something. What you're describing, if Russo has operational control of CivicFlow, he can see this city in real time. Traffic patterns, convoy routes, camera feeds. If he knows you've been talking to us, he doesn't know, Claire said. But I understand the risk. Do you? Because the risk is not abstract. The attack at the opera house, I know. I was there. Mitchell was quiet. Then what do you need from us to stay in that building safely? Claire had thought about this carefully the previous night. She had gone through it from every angle she could identify, and she had arrived at a position that was honest even if it was uncomfortable. I need protection for my sister Emily. She is not involved in any of this and she should not become leverage. She held Mitchell's gaze. I need assurance that the legitimate employees of Moretti's transport operation, the drivers, the dock workers, the people who just have jobs and have nothing to do with the criminal side, they don't get swept up in whatever happens at the end of this. I can work toward both of those, Mitchell said carefully. Not toward, I need them, as conditions. Mitchell looked at her. You're negotiating, Claire said. I am. You sound like him. No, Claire said. I sound like someone who has watched what happens when people in my position agree to things without conditions. She kept her voice level. I'm not an informant. I'm not a planted source. I'm a civilian who has information that prevents significant harm to a significant number of people. I will share that information, but I will do it on terms that protect the people I'm responsible for. Another silence. Mitchell turned her coffee cup. All right, she said. Those terms are on the table. I will formalize them through my supervisor and have written confirmation to you within 48 hours. 48 hours is a long time, Claire said. It is, Mitchell agreed. Be careful. Claire left Hendricks at 7:34. She walked 6 blocks before getting a cab. In the cab, she sat with her notebook open, but did not write anything. And the city moved past the windows, and she thought about CivicFlow Systems and what it meant that someone could see the city's movement from the inside and use it as architecture. It was 20 minutes before she wrote anything. What she wrote was, "The city is the weapon." She underlined it. Then she sat with it until the cab stopped. She was back at the penthouse by 8:15. She went to her office, opened her laptop, and pulled up every publicly available filing for CivicFlow Systems that she could access. Municipal contract awards were public record. The numbers were extraordinary, not in their size, which was significant but not unprecedented, but in their consistency. CivicFlow had won 41 of 43 competitive bids in the last 3 years. The 2 they had not won were bids they had withdrawn from. 41 out of 41 when withdrawal was counted. She was still reading when Adrian knocked on her office door at 9 o'clock. "You were not here at 8, he said. "I had something I needed to do." He came in and closed the door, which she noted. He sat in the chair across from her desk, which she also noted because in her 11 months in this building, she had never seen Adrian Moretti sit in a chair that was not at the head of something. "The audit flagged something," he said. She looked up from her laptop. "Russo's financial accounts are complex, deliberately complex. The kind of structure you build when you have something to hide, but you need it to survive a casual review." His voice was controlled. The control was costing him something. The firm found 11 payments made through 3 layers of corporate structure. Each payment originated from an entity called Meridian Distribution Holdings. Meridian Distribution Holdings, Claire said, which does not exist as an operational company. It exists on paper. It was registered in Delaware 6 years ago by a law firm that has since closed. The registration address is a mailbox, a shell company, Claire said. A shell company that paid Daniel Russo $417,000 over the last 3 years. He stopped. His jaw was very tight. The same shell company also appears in the corporate filing history of a technology contractor called CivicFlow Systems as an early-stage investor. The room was very quiet. "You already knew about CivicFlow," Claire said. It was not a question. "I found it in the last hour." He looked at her. "Did you know?" She held his gaze. She had known for 90 minutes. She had learned it from a CPD detective in a coffee shop on West Monroe. She had not told him yet, partly because she was still processing what it meant, and partly because the conversation about Detective Mitchell was not a conversation she had yet figured out how to have. "I've been looking at the municipal contract records," she said carefully. "CivicFlow has a profile that is impossible under normal competitive conditions, and their contract portfolio covers exactly the infrastructure that would allow someone to coordinate what has been happening to you for the last several weeks. Traffic signals, camera networks, dispatch coordination. The night the sanitation truck," he stopped. She had not told him about the sanitation truck yet because it had not happened yet. She looked at the clock on her wall. It happened 3 hours later. They were in the SUV, heading to a neutral restaurant for a lunch meeting, with a freight insurance broker routine, scheduled, nothing that should have attracted any particular attention. The route was one they had taken 6 times in the last month. The security driver, a man named Costa, had run the standard advance check. Claire was in the rear passenger seat beside Adrian, going over a contract summary, when something made her look up. She did not afterward have a precise explanation for what triggered it. The best she could say was that the pattern was wrong. A city sanitation truck was positioned at an intersection ahead, with its front wheels turned at an angle that made no operational sense for a vehicle that was supposed to be servicing the area. And the driver was not looking at the road or the curb or any of the things a sanitation driver looks at. He was looking at them. "Costa," she said, "Ma'am, don't stop at this light. Go through it. It's red. Go through it now." Costa hesitated for less than a second. Then the SUV was moving into the intersection against the red light. And in the same moment, the sanitation truck launched across the median with a weight and velocity that was completely disconnected from any mechanical failure or driver error. It was controlled. It was aimed, and it struck the rear of the SUV as they cleared the center of the intersection, rather than the midpoint where the impact was designed to land. The sound of it was like something Claire had never heard before. The SUV went into the concrete barrier on the right side of the road. She was held in her seat by the belt. Her notebook hit the window. The world tilted and then stopped. Her first coherent thought was Adrian. He was still in his seat. His left hand was pressed against the door where the impact had thrown him. His face was gray. He was conscious. "I'm here." His voice was rough. "Are you fine, Costa?" Costa was already on the radio. Outside, the sanitation truck had continued across the median and struck a parked delivery vehicle on the far side of the street. People were stopping. Phones were coming out. The security follow vehicle was pulling alongside them within 40 seconds. But the sanitation truck's cab was empty when the security team reached it. The driver was gone. In the 8 seconds between impact and recovery, in the middle of a major intersection on a Chicago Tuesday, whoever had been behind the wheel had disappeared into the ordinary human movement of the street. Adrian's shoulder was injured. They did not take him to a hospital. A hospital meant records, meant visibility, meant every person in the city who had an interest in whether Adrian Moretti was alive and in what condition, knowing exactly what that condition was within the hour. Instead, Costa drove them to a private medical facility that Claire had not known existed until Costa gave the address to the follow vehicle's driver. The physician worked on Adrian's shoulder while Claire sat in the adjacent room and thought about traffic signals. The light at the intersection had been red. She had told Costa to go through it, and the truck had launched at the moment it was designed to launch, which was the moment the light turned red and Adrian's convoy stopped. The light's timing had not been random. It had been set. Held red long enough to stop the convoy in the exact position where he'd be most effective, then released after the truck was already in motion. CivicFlow controlled the traffic signal system. Russo had watched their route in real time, identified the location, and timed the signal. He had probably watched 4 or 5 potential locations and chosen the one with the best geometry. He had done it from somewhere comfortable, with a laptop or a phone, looking at a city map that showed him everything moving through it, like blood through a body. She was still thinking about this when Costa came to the door. "Mr. Moretti wants you," he said. Adrian was sitting upright on the examination table with his left arm in a partial immobilizer. The gray had not left his face. He looked like a man who had been reminded very forcefully that he was made of the same materials as everyone else. "The shoulder," she said, "separated. It will heal." He was not interested in the shoulder. "Talk to me." She told him about the traffic signal. She told him about CivicFlow's contract portfolio. She told him about the shell company trail and the 41 wins and 41 bids. She told him all of it, and she watched his face as the architecture of what Russo had built assembled itself in front of him for the first time in its real dimensions. She did not yet tell him about Mitchell. "He can see every move we make," Adrian said when she finished. "Any route we take, any schedule we maintain. Every time we have been in a vehicle in this city for the last 3 years, he has had the ability to know exactly where we were." "Yes," she said. "In the Opera House, he coordinated the timing through the signal network, most likely. The timing was too precise for radio coordination alone. He would have needed infrastructure." 3 years, Adrian said. "He said it the way you say a number that has stopped being a number and become something else entirely. Daniel Russo has been doing this for at least 3 years, while sitting across the table from me, while attending my meetings." While he stopped, Claire let the silence stand. Outside the room, she could hear muffled voices, the security team communicating, organizing. Beyond that, nothing. The city sealed out by walls and routine, continuing its enormous ordinary life. "What's happening at the penthouse right now?" she asked. Costa answered from the doorway. She had not realized he was still close enough to hear. "Lieutenants are assembling. The news about the accident is moving. There are reports that Mr. Moretti didn't survive." "Who started that report?" Claire asked immediately. Costa looked at her. "Russo did," she said. "He's using the window. If the organization believes Adrian is dead, the structure fractures. Lieutenants act independently. Caruso's people move on disputed territory. By the time the truth comes out, the chaos is already running and nobody can stop it." She looked at Adrian. "You need to appear before your people tonight." "Not here. My shoulder, I know. It has to be tonight anyway." He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not weakness, but the particular acknowledgement of a man who has reached the limit of what he can carry alone and has found, unexpectedly, that someone is already beside him. "All right," he said, "tonight." He appeared before his lieutenants at 9:17 that evening, arm in the immobilizer, standing at the head of the penthouse conference table with the particular quality of presence that had always been his most reliable asset. He said 12 sentences. He told them what had happened, that he was alive, that the situation was under control, and that anyone who moved on territory or retaliation without a direct order from him personally would answer to him personally. The room was very quiet when he finished. It was Claire who noticed, from her corner, that 4 of the 7 men in the room looked at each other in the specific way of people whose plan has been disrupted. Not all 4 with the same expression, but the same micro-movement eyes to the nearest allied face, a reassessment happening in real time. She noted all 4 faces. After the room cleared, she gave Adrian the names. He didn't recognize 2 of them as having particular Russo connections. The other 2 he absorbed without visible reaction, which told her his own list was already forming. What happened in the hours after Adrian left the room was something Claire experienced alone, because Adrian went to rest under medical instruction, and the security team rotated to external posts, and she sat in the empty conference room with ledgers and laptop screens, and the particular focused intensity of a person trying to solve a puzzle before the puzzle solves them. She pulled municipal contract records. She pulled CivicFlow's corporate filings. She pulled the freight, manifest, discrepancies that had been flagged in the original conference room meeting 2 weeks ago. She pulled the audit findings on Russo's accounts. She pulled traffic incident reports for the last 6 months along routes that matched the Moretti convoy schedules. She worked for 4 hours and 19 minutes. At 2:17 in the morning, she sat back in her chair and looked at what she had assembled. Snap! The pattern was complete. Every diverted shipment corresponded to a CivicFlow maintenance window, a period when the system was officially offline for routine service, during which camera coverage on specific routes had gaps. The gaps were not random. They were targeted. They mapped directly to the location and timing of each diversion. The Opera House attack had been coordinated using the building's own municipal security camera feed. CivicFlow maintained the Opera House's public area cameras under a separate city contract. The 4th security man with the heart had been timing himself to Thach against a signal from the camera control room, which had gone offline for a scheduled 90-second maintenance window at exactly the moment the curtain opened. And the sanitation truck, she found it in the traffic incident database. The vehicle was registered to a city contractor whose maintenance contract for South Loop sanitation routes had been awarded through a CivicFlow subcontracting arrangement 14 months ago. It had been parked in that intersection for 40 minutes before they arrived. 40 minutes. Someone had positioned it while Claire was still sitting in the penthouse reviewing contract summaries. Russo had known their route before they left. He had known it because the route had been discussed in a security briefing that morning, that Russo had not attended but whose notes, she discovered by checking the access logs on the secure server, had been opened by Russo's credentials 11 minutes after the briefing ended. He was inside everything. She printed the full map of connections on the conference room printer and spread it across the table and stood back and looked at it. It was the most thorough, patient, and cold-blooded plan she had ever seen. Not violent in the way she had expected from this world. Systematic, administrative, the kind of plan that uses the city's own bones against itself. At 2:40, she took a photograph of the Enzel documents with her phone. Then she composed a message to Detective Mitchell. She wrote, "I have the full connection map. CivicFlow, the shell companies, the attack coordination. I can document all of it, but I need to tell Adrian before this goes any further. He deserves to know what's coming." Mitchell's response took 9 minutes. "Understood. You have 24 hours. After that, I move on the warrants regardless." 24 hours. Claire looked at the photograph on her phone. She looked at the documents on the table. She thought about Adrian sitting in a medical immobilizer 3 rooms away, having survived a truck that someone had aimed at him using the city's own traffic signal system, not yet knowing that the man who had been 20 years at his right hand had been steering that truck from the inside. She thought about the burgundy tie. She thought about the morning that started all of this, and the very simple equation she had made in that dressing room window, seeing something wrong and saying, "Nothing makes you part of it." The equation had not changed. It had only gotten larger. She knocked on Adrian's door at 3 in the morning. He answered it awake, which told her he had not been sleeping either. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About everything," she said. "About Russo, about CivicFlow, about what I know and how I know it. All of it." She held his gaze. "I have to tell you something I should have told you sooner, and I need you to hear it before you react." He studied her face for a moment in the dim light of the hallway. "Come in," he said. She came in. She sat down. She put her phone on the table between them, with the photograph of the connection map visible on the screen. "I met with the CPD detective this morning," she said, "before I came to the office. Her name is Laura Mitchell. She approached me at the Opera House, and I agreed to hear what she had to say." The silence that followed was the sharpest silence of their entire acquaintance. Adrian looked at her phone. He looked at the photograph. He looked at the documents on the screen with the careful, absolute attention of a man reading something that is rewriting his understanding of the present moment in real time. Then he looked at her. His voice, when it came, was very quiet and very controlled, and she understood that the control was not a sign that he was calm, but a sign that whatever was underneath the control was very large. "How long?" he said. "The contact at the Opera House was 9 days ago. The meeting was this morning. I have spoken to her once." Once, she said. "And I'm telling you now because you have a right to know, and because whatever happens next, I will not be the person who operates in your blind spot. That's not who I am." He was silent for a long time. "What did you give her?" "Nothing," Claire said. "I gave her nothing. I told her I needed to talk to you first." She kept her voice steady. "But Adrian, she has a case that's been building for 18 months. She has Russo connected to CivicFlow. She knows about the shell companies. She is moving toward this with or without me, and she is moving toward it in 24 hours. He processed this. She watched him process it, and she did not look away, and she did not apologize, and she did not fill the silence with anything that wasn't true. "You should have told me immediately." "Yes," she said. "You're right, but you didn't." "No, because I needed to understand the full picture before I came to you with it. And because I needed to make sure what I told her protected Emily and the legitimate employees before it became irrevocable." She paused. "I'm telling you now, because 24 hours from now, it will not be possible for you to make choices. It will only be possible to react. And I think you deserve the chance to choose." He looked at the photograph on her phone for a long time. "Russo," he said. "He's been sitting in my conference room for 3 years with a city infrastructure system in his pocket. He has been watching every convoy route, every security briefing, every meeting schedule. He built a plan that uses city property as a murder weapon and frames it as mechanical failure. And he stole from your employees," Claire said quietly. Adrian looked at her. "The pension account," she said, "and the employee medical fund. It's in the audit findings. The shortfall in both accounts traces back to the same shell company structure that funded Russo's operation. He financed his own plan, using money that belonged to your drivers and dock workers and the people who have been with this organization their entire working lives." The expression on Adrian's face in that moment was something she had never seen there before. Not anger, not the cold calculation she had learned to read as his most dangerous state. Something rawer than either. The particular fury of a man confronting a wrong that has been done not to him, but to people he was responsible for protecting. "He stole from them," Adrian said. "Yes." "To fund a plan to take everything from them permanently." "Yes." He stood up. He went to the window. He stood with his back to her and his good hand pressed flat against the glass, and he breathed slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who knows what he is capable of when he stops breathing deliberately. She waited. After a long time, he turned around. "What do you need me to do?" he said. She looked at him. She had been preparing for the version of this conversation where he refused, where the instinct toward control and autonomy that had governed his entire life reasserted itself, and he decided that no external authority had the right to walk into his operation with warrants and agreements and conditions. She had prepared for that version, and she had thought about what she would say. She had not fully prepared for this version, the version where he asked her what she needed. "I need you to trust me for 24 more hours," she said. "I have a plan. It involves Russo, and it involves Mitchell, and it involves giving you the chance to choose what comes next on your own terms, rather than having it happen to you." She held his gaze. "But it requires you to do something that will be very difficult for you." "What?" "It requires you to be patient," she said, "and to let me lead." The silence that followed was the longest of the night. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago always does at 3 a.m, breathing, turning, continuing its complicated and enormous life, completely unaware that in a penthouse above the city, a former housekeeper and a man who had built 20 years of power on fear and loyalty were sitting across from each other at the hinge point of both their lives. Adrian looked at her. "All right," he said, "all right, tell me the plan." She picked up her phone. She pulled up the photograph of the connection map. She told him everything. The plan had 3 requirements. It needed Russo to believe he had already won. It needed a location he would choose himself. And it needed Adrian to perform the most difficult role of his life, a man who had been broken. Claire laid it out at 3:40 in the morning on the penthouse kitchen table, the same table where Raymond Cole's burner phone and $46,000 had told them everything was larger than one frightened driver. That table had become the place where the real conversations happened in this building, away from the conference room formality and the security protocols and the performance of authority that governed every other surface. Russo needs to think the shoulder injury is worse than it is, she said. He needs to think the organization is fracturing. He needs to believe that you are considering stepping back from operations temporarily and transferring control. Adrian looked at her across the table. His arm was still in the immobilizer. And if he believes that, he'll want to accelerate. He's been patient for 3 years. The moment he thinks the window is actually open, he won't wait. He'll want the signing before you recover enough to change your mind. Signing ceremony, Adrian said, for the temporary transfer of operational control of the transport companies, including the dispatch system access codes. She paused. Everything he's been working toward. We offer for it to him wrapped up in waiting. And when he reaches for it, he confesses to reach for it. Because the only way to accept that transfer is to explain why he wants it. And Russo is not the kind of man who can hold something he's wanted for 20 years without saying so. He needs you to know he won. That's been part of this from the beginning. He doesn't just want the organization. He wants Adrian Moretti to understand that Daniel Russo outmaneuvered him. Adrian was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup once, twice. You read that in him. I read it in every meeting I've watched him run. He enjoys the room knowing he's the smartest person in it. He's been suppressing that for 20 years. The moment he believes you can't retaliate, it comes out. And Mitchell's team will have recording equipment in place before the meeting starts. Federal grade, nothing visible. She held his gaze. But Adrian, this only works if you go into that room genuinely willing to let the truth come out, not as a performance. If Russo is as good as I think he is, he'll feel the difference. He looked at her steadily. You're asking me to walk into a room with a man who has been trying to have me killed for 3 years and stay calm. I'm asking you to walk into a room with a man who has been trying to have you killed for 3 years and let him think he's finally succeeded. She kept her voice even. There's a difference. He said nothing for a moment. Then where? He chooses the location. That's essential. If we choose it, he'll know. We float the idea of the signing through intermediaries, people he trusts, people he's already compromised inside your organization. We let the information travel to him naturally. When he proposes a location, we accept it. He'll choose somewhere he controls. Yes, which means somewhere with CivicFlow coverage, which means Mitchell's team needs to work around that. She paused. I've already discussed that with her. They have a protocol for operating in CivicFlow covered areas. It involves hardware that doesn't depend on the city's network. Adrian looked at her. The expression on his face was one she had seen developing over 3 weeks, not trust exactly, because trust was still a word that cost him more than most people paid for it. Something adjacent to trust. The recognition that she had, repeatedly, been right when it mattered, and that this had become its own kind of information. All right, he said, we do it your way. She looked at him across the table. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Chicago was beginning its 4 o'clock shift change, the city's deepest gear turning over. The hours when the people who keep everything running move through streets that everyone else is sleeping through. There's one more thing, she said. He waited. At the end of this, when Russo is arrested and the recordings are submitted and Mitchell's case goes forward, the investigation does not stop with Russo. It goes into the organization, all of it. She held his gaze and did not look away. I told Mitchell I would provide evidence. I told her about CivicFlow and the shell companies and the attack coordination. But she already had 18 months of work on the organization itself. On you, she paused. I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. The silence was very complete. You're telling me that cooperating with this investigation does not save me from the investigation, he said. Yes, I cooperate. I help expose Russo. I help dismantle the attack network. And at the end of it, I still answer for what I've done. Yes, she said. That's what I'm telling you. He was quiet for a long time. She let the quiet stand. She did not try to soften it or qualify it or find the version of honesty that was easier to hear. He deserved the plain truth and she gave it to him and she waited. And the employees, he said finally, the pension funds, the medical accounts, the people who had nothing to do with any of this. The stolen funds get returned. That's a condition I've already put in writing with Mitchell. The legitimate business operations continue under independent management. The people who just had jobs keep their jobs. He absorbed this. And you negotiated all of that already. I negotiated the framework. It requires your formal cooperation to activate. You did this before you told me. I did this so that when I told you, you would have something real to consider instead of just a threat. She kept her voice steady. I'm not sorry for the order. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Mitchell sooner. Those are two different things. He looked at the table. He looked at his coffee. He looked at the immobilizer on his arm. She could see him working through something, not the strategic calculation, which she thought he had probably done in the first 30 seconds, but something underneath it. Something personal and private that did not belong to her, but that she was witnessing anyway. The way you witness things when you are the only other person in the room. My father built this organization, he said. He handed it to me when I was 28 years old, and he told me that loyalty was the only currency that mattered. That everything else, money, territory, fear, those were tools. Loyalty was the foundation. He stopped, and Russo sat at his funeral in the second row, Claire said quietly, and stole from the people my father spent his life protecting. He looked up at her. His eyes were very clear. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not that Russo betrayed me. It's that he was right about one thing. I built this on fear. My father built it on loyalty, but I stopped believing in loyalty and started believing in leverage. And Russo saw that, and he used it, because an organization built on leverage has leverage running in every direction. She looked at him. She did not offer comfort. She did not argue with the assessment. Both would have been disrespectful to the honesty it cost him to say it. What you do next can be different, she said. Can it? Yes, but only if you choose it. Not because I asked you to, not because Mitchell's team has warrants coming, because you decide it's who you want to be. She held his gaze. That's the only version of change that's real. He looked at her for a long moment in the quiet kitchen of the penthouse, in the deep hours of a Chicago morning, with the city turning slowly outside and 20 years of his own history pressing down on every surface of the room. Set the trap, he said. She nodded. She picked up her phone. She sent Mitchell one word: ready. The intermediary chain worked exactly as she had designed it. The following day, the information had traveled from a deliberately careless conversation between two of the four compromised lieutenants. Claire had identified men. She and Adrian had fed a specific, verifiable story about Adrian's health and his intention to step back through two more links and arrived. She was almost certain at Russo. She was certain because at 2:17 in the afternoon, Russo called Adrian directly. She was in the room when the call came in. Adrian put it on speaker without looking at her, which she took as a mark of something. He answered it with the particular flatness of a man managing pain, which required no performance because the shoulder was genuinely painful. And she watched his face as Russo's voice came through. I heard you're having a rough couple of days, Russo said. His voice was warm, concerned. Exactly the voice she had heard in 20 conference rooms measured generous, the voice of a man you trusted because he had learned precisely how trust sounds. I've had better weeks, Adrian said. The shoulder is serious. Serious enough that the doctor wants me out of action for at least 3 weeks. Maybe longer. A pause. The pause of a man computing. You know I'm here for whatever you need. Whatever the organization needs. Actually, that's something I wanted to discuss with you. Adrian's voice was steady. Tired, believably tired, but steady. I need to make some temporary arrangements. There are operational accounts, the dispatch system access, some contracts that need continuous oversight. I can't do it from here. Whatever you need, Russo said again. Immediately, too immediately. You tell me what you need and we do it. I was thinking a formal transfer of operational authority, temporary. Just until I'm back on my feet, a beat. She watched Adrian's face, and he watched the phone, and the second stretched out with everything in it. I think that's wise, Russo said. Smart, actually. Better to have it documented. In case anything, he stopped himself. Just for clarity. I was thinking we do it formally. A signing. I'll have the documents drawn up. Of course. Where are you thinking? There it was. The question that was not casual, even though it sounded casual. Claire had been waiting for it. Russo would not accept a location Adrian proposed. He needed to control the environment. He needed CivicFlow coverage, camera placement he was familiar with, exits he had mapped. Somewhere neutral, Adrian said. I'll leave that to you. You know this city better than anyone. The pause that followed was 3 seconds. She counted. The old rail terminal on the south side, Russo said. The Caldwell terminal. It's quiet. It's private. Your people know it. And it's big enough that we can have security without it feeling, crowded. She wrote on her notepad, Caldwell Terminal. She showed it to Adrian. He read it without expression. Friday, Adrian said. 2 o'clock. Friday, Russo agreed. The call ended. The kitchen was quiet again. Caldwell Terminal, Adrian said. He's comfortable there, Claire said. He's used it before. He knows the camera placement and the signal coverage. She was already typing on her phone. I'm sending the location to Mitchell now. She needs 48 hours to place the recording hardware independently. That gives us 2 days. She agreed. She looked at him. He was looking at the phone where Russo's voice had been. He sounded exactly the same, Adrian said. The same as every phone call for 20 years. I cannot find it in his voice. Not even now, knowing everything. That's what makes him dangerous, she said. And that's why a trap works on him. He's so confident in his own performance that he doesn't account for the possibility that someone else's performance is better. Adrian looked at her. Is mine? She met his eye. It will be. The 2 days before Friday were the longest of Claire's experience in that building and possibly of her adult life. She worked the connection map. She refined the documentation. She had 2 more conversations with Mitchell, each one adding a layer of legal structure to the agreement they had built. Protections for Emily formalized, protections for the legitimate workforce in writing. The terms of Adrian's cooperation spelled out in language that could survive a courtroom. On Thursday morning, Emily called. Claire stepped out of her office to take it, standing in the hallway with the phone pressed against her ear and her hand flat against the wall for balance. You sound different, Emily said. I'm in the middle of something complicated. You've been in the middle of something complicated for 3 weeks and you won't tell me what it is. Emily's voice had the particular quality of a younger sister who has spent years understanding more than she is supposed to. Are you safe? Claire thought about the sanitation truck. She thought about the curtain at the opera house. She thought about Raymond Cole loading a gun 4 floors below a dressing room window. I'm being careful, she said. That's not what I asked. I know. She leaned against the wall. Emily, I need you to stay at Rachel's place this weekend. Not your apartment, Rachel's. Silence, Claire. It's precautionary. I don't expect anything to happen. But if I'm being careful, I want to be careful about all of it. What have you gotten into? Emily's voice was quiet now. Not afraid. Just serious. The voice of someone assembling information. Something I couldn't walk away from, Claire said. Something that needed someone to notice it. That sounds like you. Yeah. She looked at the end of the hallway. Through the office door, she could see the edge of the connection map she had printed. Better this week. The new protocol is working. A pause. The billing office called. Someone paid 3 months of the outstanding balance. Claire was very still. What? A payment from, I don't know, some kind of legal services fund or something. I didn't catch the full name. 3 months. Claire, that's almost, I'll look into it. Her voice was careful. Don't worry about it yet. She knew exactly what it was. Mitchell had moved faster than expected on the Victims Assistance Fund arrangement. It was legitimate. She had read the documentation herself, had insisted on reading it herself. But hearing Emily say it out loud, the reality of 3 months of balance, clearing like a breath finally released, hit her somewhere she had been holding very tightly for a very long time. She stood in the hallway for a moment after the call ended, and she breathed, and she did not cry, which took a certain amount of effort. Then she went back to work. Friday arrived the way important days always arrive, with the specific quality of an ordinary morning that has something different underneath it. The light was the same. The coffee tasted the same. The building had its usual rhythms. But everything felt slightly too clear, too defined, the way objects look before a storm, like the air itself is paying attention. At 9:30, Claire went to Adrian's dressing room. She had not been in this room since the morning everything started. The room was the same. The chair in the same position, the mirror along the same wall, the window looking out over the driveway where a black SUV would soon be waiting again. She stood in the doorway and let the fact of it settle over her for a moment. Adrian was there. He was in the same white dress shirt. His arm was out of the immobilizer. The physician had cleared it for the day, with restrictions. And Claire had argued with the physician's caution and lost, and then argued with Adrian's stubbornness about the restrictions, and partially won. He would have the arm, but he would not use it for anything that would worsen the joint. He looked at her in the doorway. I figured you'd come, he said. She picked up the burgundy tie from the back of the chair. It was the same one. She had checked the drawer that morning and found it, and she had known it belonged in this room today. And she had brought it without saying anything to anyone about why. She stepped forward and began working it around his collar. Her hands were steady. She noticed this herself and was quietly grateful for it. "You're not nervous," he said. "I am nervous," she said. "My hands are just not participating in that." She could feel him almost smile. "Not quite. If this goes wrong," he said, "it won't go wrong. If it does, Adrian." She kept working the knot. "I have spent 3 weeks watching you make every decision in this building, based on what happens if things go wrong. What if for today, you make one decision based on what happens when it goes right?" He was quiet. She continued working. "What happens when it goes right?" he asked. And the way he asked it, not rhetorically, not defensively, but actually asking, like a man who had genuinely lost the thread of that version of events and needed someone to hand it back to him, stopped her hands for just a moment. She started moving again. "When it goes right, Russo confesses and goes to prison, and the people who depend on this organization get to keep their livelihoods. The pension funds go back to the people they were stolen from. Emily's treatment continues. CivicFlow gets dismantled, and the city contractors who were taking bribes answer for it." She straightened the knot. "And you get to be something other than what you've been." "And what do I get to be?" She met his eyes in the mirror, the same window behind his left shoulder, the driveway below, 4 floors down, and no one waiting there with a gun in their pocket, because she had looked out this window 3 weeks ago and said something. "Accountable," she said, "which is harder than powerful. But it's real." The knot was perfect. She placed both hands flat against his lapels and straightened the jacket. He reached up with his good hand and covered her hand for a moment. He did not hold it, just covered it, briefly. "The way you touch something you are about to leave." "Thank you," he said, not the way he had said it before, not the controlled, conditional gratitude of a man measuring what he owed. Something much simpler than that. She stepped back. "Don't be late." The Caldwell Terminal was a rail facility that had been decommissioned 7 years earlier and had been drifting through various municipal planning discussions since without resolution. It was large, concrete, and quiet in the way that abandoned industrial spaces are quiet, not the absence of sound, but the presence of old sound, echo, and emptiness where machinery used to be. Mitchell's team had been inside for 31 hours. Claire knew this because Mitchell had confirmed it at 8 that morning in a text that read, "Equipment placed and tested. 12 agents. 3 entry points." Claire arrived at the terminal at 1:15 with Costa and 2 other security men. She did not carry a weapon. She had her notebook and her phone and 3 weeks of accumulated knowledge and the particular focused calm of someone who has already decided what they are willing to lose. Russo arrived at 1:52, 8 minutes early. He came with 4 men, which was 2 more than he usually traveled with, which told her that despite his confidence, some part of him was accounting for contingency. She filed this away. He embraced Adrian, the same embrace, shoulder grip, handshake, the practiced warmth of 20 years. He smiled at Claire with the specific smile of a man who has decided she is furniture. She smiled back. She was very good at being furniture when she needed to be. The documents were on a folding table. The documents were real, drawn up by an attorney who worked with Mitchell's office, accurate in their language, functional in their legal effect. If Adrian signed them and Russo accepted them, the transfer would be legitimate. This was important. It could not be a fake. Russo would have checked. He checked. She watched him read through every page with the careful attention of a man who did not become what he was by trusting paperwork. He read for 11 minutes. He asked 2 specific questions about the dispatch system access protocol and received accurate answers. He nodded. "This is good," Russo said. He set the documents down and looked at Adrian with the particular warmth of a man arriving at the end of something long. "This is the right call, Adrian. You need to rest, and the organization needs continuity. I'll take care of everything." "I know you will," Adrian said. His voice was level, tired, completely believable. Claire stood 6 feet away, slightly behind Russo's left shoulder, where his eyes were not. "There's one thing I want to understand," Adrian said. Russo spread his hands. Open, generous. "Of course, Raymond." The name landed in the space between them. Russo's hand stayed open, his face stayed warm. She noted both. "Terrible situation," Russo said. "I still can't believe who paid him." A beat. "The investigation is still." "Daniel." Adrian's voice was quiet. "I am about to sign over the operation I have spent my entire adult life building. Before I do that, I want to know who paid Raymond Cole. I want to hear it from you." He held Russo's eyes. "Because you know. You've always known more than you've told me. And I think right now, at the end of all of this, we can afford to be honest with each other." She watched Russo's face. She watched the calculation running behind his eyes, the assessment of Risk. The measurement of what Adrian knew versus what he was fishing for. The particular arrogance of a man who had been the smartest person in every room for 20 years, deciding that he was still the smartest person in this one. And she watched the moment he decided to let himself have it. I paid him. The room was very still. 46,000, Russo said. The warmth had not left his face. It had changed its quality from performance to something more genuine, which was worse. The pleasure of finally saying the thing you have been holding. He was supposed to deliver you to a location where you would be persuaded to hand over the access codes. That's all. It was clean. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. The warehouse on the south side, Adrian said. You found that. Russo nodded slowly. You're still sharp, even now. He sounded genuinely admiring. A warehouse. 2 days, maybe 3. You give us the codes, we verify them, you come home. Simple. And the opera house. That was not supposed to go the way it did. The man I placed inside Caruso's security overreacted. I wanted confusion, not a firefight. Russo's voice was reasonable. The voice of a man explaining a minor miscalculation. The goal was to make you and Caruso mistrust each other long enough for the fracture to become permanent. I didn't need either of you dead. I needed you both weakened. The sanitation truck was meant to kill me, Adrian said. The shoulder injury changed my timeline, Russo said, and the reasonableness in his voice was the most chilling thing Claire had heard in 3 weeks. I needed you to sign before you recovered enough to resist. The truck was supposed to Adrian. His voice shifted slightly. You understand. It was never personal. This organization has been running on borrowed time for years. The way you've been operating, the exposure, the federal attention, it was going to collapse. I was going to be the one who rebuilt it correctly. I've been planning this for 8 years. 8 years of careful, patient work. 8 years, Adrian said. I started the CivicFlow structure 8 years ago. Infrastructure first, then the organizational positioning, then the financial groundwork. He almost sounded proud. He sounded exactly as she had predicted he would sound. The pension funds, I know that looks bad. But that money would have been returned once the transition was complete. It was a temporary resource, nothing more. You stole from my people. I borrowed from a future they were going to benefit from. You stole from them, Adrian said again. No heat. Just the flat weight of the truth, repeated until it was undeniable. People who spent their careers working for this organization. People my father made promises to. Russo's expression shifted slightly. The pleasure of saying the thing had edges to it now. Your father made promises that were not sustainable. I was going to be the one to Daniel. Russo stopped. It's over, Adrian said. The door opened. Mitchell's team entered from 3 directions simultaneously, and the specific quality of the silence that followed was the silence of a room whose architecture has just been completely redrawn. Russo looked at the agents. He looked at Adrian. He looked at Claire, who had stepped forward to stand beside Adrian, no longer 6 feet away, no longer behind Russo's shoulder. He looked at her for the first time since entering the terminal as if she were actually a person. You, he said. Yes, she said. The maid, she said. But it started with the tie. Mitchell was already reading Russo his rights. Her voice was steady and practiced and completely without drama. 2 of her agents had Russo's 4 men against the far wall. The room worked itself out in the efficient and slightly anticlimactic way that real law enforcement operations tend to work, without the noise that television has trained everyone to expect. Russo did not fight. She had not expected him to. He was too intelligent for that, and the calculation had already run, and he already knew the result. He looked at Adrian once more as they walked him toward the exit. 20 years, he said. It was not an accusation. It sounded in the strangest way like a form of grief. 20 years, Adrian agreed. His voice was even. Russo left the terminal. Mitchell crossed to where Adrian and Claire were standing. She looked at Claire first. The recording is clean. Everything he said is usable. Good, Claire said. Then Mitchell looked at Adrian. The look was careful and professional, and contained within it the specific weight of 18 months of work, arriving at its intended destination. Mr. Moretti, we'll need to begin the formal cooperation process today. I understand, he said. By 4 o'clock. I'll be there. Mitchell nodded once, and then she was moving, and the terminal was filling with the controlled activity of an investigation in motion, and Claire and Adrian stood in the middle of it, like 2 people who have been inside a storm and are now watching it from the outside. She looked at him. The burgundy tie was still perfect. How are you doing? She asked. He considered the question with the same seriousness he gave to all questions that mattered. I'm not sure yet, he said. I think I need to be somewhere quiet to find out. She nodded. She understood that. The employees, she said. The pension fund restoration Mitchell's office will move on that within 48 hours. The independent management structure for the transport companies is already drafted. Claire, she looked at him. Thank you, he said, for the second time that day. Still simple. Still real. You made the hard choices, she said. I just made sure you had the right information to make them with. He looked at her in the particular way she had spent 3 weeks learning to read fully, without performance, the real attention of a man who had not always known how to give it. What happens now, he asked. For you. She thought about the question seriously because it deserved seriousness. I go home, she said. I call my sister. I sleep for approximately 12 hours, she paused. And then I think about what I'm supposed to do with everything I've learned in the last 3 weeks. You'll figure it out, he said. I usually do. Outside the terminal, the city was doing exactly what it always did, moving, breathing, enormous and ordinary and completely continuous. Cars and pedestrians and delivery trucks, and all the 10,000 small operations of a major city running simultaneously, indifferent to what had just happened inside one decommissioned rail building on the south side. Somewhere in that city, the CivicFlow control network was about to go dark, its contracts frozen pending the federal investigation. The traffic signals would run on their standard timing. The cameras would record what they recorded, without direction. The city would move the way cities are supposed to move, not as a weapon, but as a place where people live. She stood outside the terminal, and she looked at the street. She thought about a Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago, and a window on the 4th floor, and a man loading a gun beside a black SUV. She thought about the things she had said to Adrian when he asked why she had warned him. Because seeing something wrong and staying silent would make me part of it. She still believed it. She believed it more now than she had then, with everything she had seen in between. Believing it had not made things simpler. It had not made them easier or safer or without cost. It had made them real, which was the only version of any of it she was capable of living with. She called Emily. Emily answered on the second ring. It's done, Claire said. She thought about it. Yes, she said. Come home, Emily said. I'm coming home. She walked to the car. Costa was waiting. The city opened up around her as they drove, familiar and enormous and entirely itself, and she sat in the back seat and did not think about anything very specific. And for the first time in 3 weeks, she let her hands simply rest, open, in her lap, without holding on to anything at all. She slept for 14 hours, not 12, the way she had said to Adrian outside the terminal, with the careful optimism of a person who thinks they know how their own body works. 14. She went home to her apartment, called Emily, told her it was done, and that she was safe and that the payment on the medical balance was legitimate, and she would explain everything soon. Then she sat on her couch for approximately 6 minutes before lying down and losing consciousness with the lights still on and her shoes still on and her notebook open on the coffee table with the last entry still visible, the date. Friday, and 2 words she had written before leaving the penthouse that morning. The 2 words were, do it right. She woke up the following morning, Saturday, to 17 missed calls and a message from Mitchell that read, Caruso detained on separate charges this morning. Case is moving faster than expected. Call me, she called her. Mitchell answered before the second ring. Caruso's attorneys tried to negotiate a cooperation deal at 6 this morning, 3 hours after we formally arrested Russo. Word travels fast in this city. What did Caruso offer? Names, municipal officials. 3 aldermen and a deputy director of public works who were on CivicFlow's payment structure. The corruption goes deeper than we modeled. Mitchell's voice was controlled, but underneath it was the particular energy of an investigator watching a case expand into its real dimensions. Your connection map was the framework. Everything we're finding is inside it. Claire sat on her couch with her shoes still on from the night before and her notebook in her lap, and she thought about the night she had spread those documents across the conference room table and looked at the pattern and written. The city is the weapon. The employees, she said. Pension fund restoration orders go out Monday morning. The independent management structure for Moretti's transport companies is in the court filing. It will be in place by end of week. Mitchell paused. I want you to know that the judge specifically cited your testimony framework in granting the expedited order. The argument that innocent workers should not bear the cost of their employer's crimes, she found it compelling. Claire looked at the notebook. Good, she said. That's the part that matters most. I know you believe that, Mitchell said. I also know you testified in a way that was not easy. Honest, Claire said. It was honest, there's a difference. She had given her formal testimony 4 days ago, in a federal building downtown, in a room with wood paneling and recording equipment, and two attorneys who asked questions with the precise clinical efficiency of people who do this every day. She had told the truth about everything she had seen, about Raymond's gun in the driveway, about the opera house and the curtain and the security man's watch, about the sanitation truck and the traffic signals and the CivicFlow connection map, about Russo's ring and the conference room meeting and the shell companies, about the terminal and what Russo had said when he believed he had finally won. And she had told the truth about Adrian. Not the version where he became a better man the moment she arrived and everything he had done before ceased to matter. The real version. The version where an organization built on fear and leverage and the exploitation of vulnerable people had caused real harm to real people for years. And the man at the top of that organization was responsible for it, and his cooperation in exposing Russo and dismantling the structure did not erase that responsibility. It was the beginning of addressing it. The attorney for the defense had tried 3 times to get her to soften that. She had not softened it once. The attorney for the prosecution had tried to get her to harden it, to frame Adrian as purely cynical, as someone whose cooperation was entirely strategic. She had not hardened it either. She had told them what she had observed, what she had seen in his face at 3 in the morning in a kitchen when she told him the truth, what she had seen in the terminal when he stood across from the man who had spent 8 years dismantling his life from the inside and did not retaliate, what she had seen when he sat across from federal investigators for 11 hours over 3 days and answered every question they asked with the complete, unembellished truth. She had told them that accountability and cynicism are not the same thing, and that she could not tell them which one motivated Adrian Moretti in the end, but that she could tell them exactly what he had done and what he had chosen not to do, and that the choice had been real. The sentencing had come 6 weeks later, reduced as Mitchell had negotiated, but real. Adrian had sat in the courtroom and received it with the same quality of stillness she had first seen in a dressing room mirror, and she had sat 3 rows back and watched his face, and found that she could read it clearly by now, not relief, not despair, just the particular steadiness of a man who has decided to be the person who can take the consequence of his own choices. That steadiness, she thought, was the most honest thing she had ever seen from him. The months that followed had their own rhythm. She went back to school in September, enrolled in the behavioral psychology program at a university on the North Side that had accepted her application 14 months earlier and that she had deferred twice because of Emily, because of money, because of the long, familiar, accumulating weight of things that need to happen before other things can happen. The program was 2 years. She went in the evenings and on Saturdays, and she sat in lecture halls with people 10 years younger than her, who had not spent 11 months being invisible in a building full of dangerous men. And she listened to professors talk about behavioral observation and threat assessment and the psychology of deception. And she took meticulous notes in the same kind of black notebook she had carried through every room in the penthouse. And sometimes a professor would say something about how people reveal truth through gesture and micro-expression and postural shift, and she would write it down and think, I know. I learned this from watching Daniel Russo rub a ring that didn't belong to him. Emily's treatment stabilized. The new protocol continued working. Claire went to the clinic with her twice a month and sat in the waiting room and did her coursework and felt, for the first time in several years, something that was close to the weight of a future that was actually coming, rather than one that was perpetually out of reach. She thought about Adrian, not constantly, not in the way that disrupted the rhythm of her days, but present, the way significant things remained present, available when she reached for them, not demanding when she didn't. She received 2 letters from him in the first 6 months. They were handwritten, which she had not expected, and careful, which she had. The first one was short. He told her that the legitimate transport company had retained 93% of its workforce under the new management structure. He told her that the pension fund restoration had been completed. He told her that he was working with federal investigators on financial crime cases that had nothing to do with his own charges, identifying patterns, following money through structures. He understood because he had built similar ones himself. He did not ask her how she was. She noticed this and thought about it and concluded that it was deliberate, that he understood he did not have the standing to ask. That asking would create a pressure she had not invited, and that understanding this was itself a form of change. The second letter came 3 months later. It was longer. He told her about a program at the correctional facility that worked with young men from the South Side Mostly kids who had been recruited into the fringes of organizations, like his when they were 15 or 16, and were now inside and trying to find a version of themselves that was not defined by how they had gotten there. He had started attending the sessions. Not as a counselor, he was clear about that, characteristically precise about what he was, and was not qualified to claim. He went as someone who understood how those choices got made and who was in a position to say what happened on the other end of them. Claire read that letter 3 times. She wrote back. 1 page. She told him about the behavioral psychology program. She told him that Emily was doing better. She told him that she had started a small consulting project with a private security firm, advising on how to train non-security personnel, hotel staff, hospital workers, school employees to recognize and report suspicious behavior safely. She told him that the framework she was building was based on something she had said to him once, something she still believed, that the people society overlooks often see the most. She did not tell him what she felt. Not because she didn't know, but because what she felt was complicated and real and deserved time and truth in equal measure, and that time was not yet. In the spring of the following year, Mitchell called her with news that was both expected and still somehow surprising when it arrived. CivicFlow Systems had been fully dismantled following the federal investigation. 41 municipal employees had been charged with bribery and contract manipulation. 3 aldermen had resigned. The deputy director of public works had pleaded guilty. The entire contracting structure had been overhauled, with new transparency requirements that would make the kind of systematic corruption Russo had built essentially impossible to replicate at the same scale. Your connection map, Mitchell said. It's in the legislative record. The reform package the city council passed cites it directly as the evidentiary framework. Someone in the council office is calling it the Bennett framework. Claire sat with that for a moment. I don't need it named after me. I know, Mitchell said anyway. Names matter, especially when they belong to people who weren't supposed to be noticed. After the call, she sat at her kitchen table and thought about that Tuesday morning for the first time in months with full attention, rather than the partial attention of someone with too many other things to hold. She thought about the dressing room window and the angle of sunlight and the way Raymond Cole's body had been positioned so that what he was doing with his hands was invisible from every angle except the one she happened to be standing at. She thought about how close it had all come to being nothing. If she had finished the knot and looked away, if she had looked out the window a minute later, if she had made the calculation that the cost of speaking was too high, which would have been a very reasonable calculation, which almost anyone else in her position would have made and could not have been blamed for making. She thought I was in the right place. And then she thought the thing underneath that, the thing she had never quite put into words for herself, even though it had been running through everything she had done since that morning. Being in the right place only matters if you use it. She graduated from the behavioral psychology program on a Saturday in May, 18 months after she enrolled. Emily was in the 3rd row. She wore a blue dress and cried, which she would afterward deny, and which Claire had a photograph of, which she would treasure. Mitchell came. Claire had not expected that. The detective was in the back row in civilian clothes, and she nodded once when Claire caught her eye, and Claire nodded back, and that was sufficient. By autumn, she had built the consulting framework into an actual company. Small herself, a former CPD training coordinator named Marcus Webb, who had reached out after the Bennett framework passed the council, and a part-time administrator. They called it Observable, which Marcus said sounded too much like a software company, which Claire said was fine because they operated in environments where blending in was the point. Observable trained people who were invisible by profession, hotel housekeeping staff, hospital orderlies and cleaning crews, school custodians and cafeteria workers, office building maintenance teams, airport ground crews, the people who moved through every environment in the city with access to all of it, the back corridors, the service entrances, the spaces between the official version of a place and its actual operational reality. They taught these people 2 things. First, what to look for. Not everything. Not a comprehensive threat assessment protocol that required professional training to execute. Specific, concrete, observable behaviors, the wrong body posture in the wrong context, the hand that goes to the wrong pocket, the eyes that track the wrong thing. The behaviors that trained security personnel sometimes missed because trained security personnel were watching for what training told them to watch for, while the people who moved through the margins of every room were watching with the particular alertness of people who needed to understand their environment to function within it. Second, how to report it safely, without putting themselves in the position of making an accusation, without requiring them to be certain, without creating a situation where the act of reporting became more dangerous than the thing they had seen. A clear chain of communication that protected the person at the beginning of it. The curriculum was tested and refined and then tested again, and by the end of the first year, Observable had trained over 400 people across 16 organizations, and 2 of those organizations had reported suspicious activity through the training protocol that had resulted in active law enforcement follow-up, and one of those follow-ups had prevented a significant security incident at a hospital on the west side. That one mattered to her in a specific way she found difficult to articulate. It was not her training the individuals involved had used. It was the training of people she had trained, which was a different thing, a larger thing, the thing that happens when a single act of observation becomes a practice, a discipline, a skill that can be handed from one invisible person to another and another until it is genuinely widespread. The people society overlooks often see the most. She had written that in a grant application for Observable's first public funding cycle. The program officer who reviewed it had called her directly to say that the line had been in her head for 3 days after she read it. Claire had thanked her and not said where it had come from, which was not from a book or a lecture or a research paper, but from a Tuesday morning and a window on the 4th floor and a man she had not yet decided how to talk about publicly. On the 2nd anniversary of that Tuesday, she received a package. It came by courier to her office, not her apartment, which meant it had been sent through someone who knew where her office was, which meant either Mitchell or someone who had spoken to Mitchell. The package was a flat wooden box, simple and well made, the kind of box that has been chosen with some care. Inside it, folded with precision, was the burgundy tie. She held it for a long time. It was the same one. She would have known it anywhere, the weight of it, the specific shade of dark burgundy that was almost brown in certain lights, the silk that still held its structure perfectly because she had tied it well and it had been cared for well in the years since. Underneath it a card, handwritten, the handwriting she recognized now from 2 letters, and the word she had started to think of simply as his careful, slightly angular, the handwriting of someone who writes as if what they are writing down matters. The card said, "You told me not to get in the car. What you really gave me was a chance to choose another road." She read it twice. She set it down. She picked the tie up again and held it and looked at it and thought about all of it, the full sequence. From the first knot to the last, from the moment her hands stopped moving in a dressing room to this moment in her own office, in her own company, in the life she was building from every choice that had followed that first one. She did not cry. That was not what this was. This was something quieter and more complete, the feeling of a circle closing without closing, of a story that was not finished but had found its shape. She put the tie back in the box and set the box on the corner of her desk where she could see it. Then she went back to work. 3 months later, on a Thursday evening, she was giving a public lecture at a community center on the north side. The lecture was part of a series on civic safety and community awareness that Observable had partnered with the city to develop as part of the post-CivicFlow reform implementation. The audience was about 60 people, a mix of community organization workers, neighborhood watch coordinators, a handful of social workers, and several people who had simply seen the flyer and been curious. She was 40 minutes into it when she saw him. He was sitting in the last row, dark suit, plain tie, slightly crooked. He had been there, she estimated, for about 15 minutes. She had registered the movement at the back of the room without processing it, which was the particular way her attention now worked, cataloging periphery automatically, returning to it when something resolved. She finished her point about behavioral consistency versus situational anomaly and took a breath and did not stop speaking and did not look at him again directly until the lecture was complete. When she closed, 60 people asked questions or gathered their things or drifted toward the exit, and the community center had its post-event hum. And she answered 3 questions and thanked the organizer and signed 1 notebook for a woman who said the training her daughter had received through Observable had changed the way her daughter moved through the world. That one she held for a moment. That one was worth everything. When the room had thinned to 7 or 8 people, he walked forward. He was thinner than she remembered. Not unhealthy, something more like a man who had been through a particular kind of fire and come out the other side of it with less that wasn't necessary. His eyes were the same. The quality of his attention was the same, full, without performance. He stopped in front of her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. She was aware of the remaining people in the room. She was aware of the distance between them and what it meant and what it was correct to be. Then she looked at his tie. It was dark navy, slightly crooked to the left. Not badly knotted, just not quite. The particular slightly offness of a man who had learned to tie his own tie, but had always been more careful about it when someone else was checking. She looked at it for a long moment. "You still haven't learned," she said. He looked down at it, then back at her. "I kept thinking about learning," he said. "And then I kept thinking there might be someone better suited to teach me." She held his gaze. The room had almost emptied now. The last few people were moving toward the exit with the oblivious courtesy of people who have decided two other people need space and are providing it without making it obvious. "How are you?" she asked, and meant it completely. The way she always meant the questions she asked. "Different," he said. "I'm still working out what different means, exactly. But different." He paused. "The Southside program. I'm running 2 sessions a week now, I heard," she said. "Marcus Webb knows one of the program coordinators." "Small city," he said. "Enormous city," she said. "But some things travel." He looked at her notebook, which was on the table beside her. Black cover. Same kind she had always used. "Is observable what you planned when you left the penthouse?" "I didn't plan it," she said honestly. "I just kept following what needed to happen. And this is what it led to." He nodded. He was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet she read him the way she had learned to read him the full architecture of what was actually present underneath the surface of what was said. "I read the grant application," he said. "The one for Observable's first funding cycle. The program officer sent me a copy. She said she thought I should see it." He looked at her. The line about people society overlooks seeing the most. She waited. "You wrote it about yourself," he said. "But you wrote it from the first morning." "From the window." "Yes. I've been thinking about that for 6 months," he said. "About what it means that the only person in that building who saw what was happening was the person everyone else had decided wasn't worth looking at." He paused. "I think about what I missed. In 20 years of running that organization, how many things I missed because I was looking at the wrong level. Because I assumed that information came from people with authority. It comes from people with access," she said. "Authority and access are not the same thing." "No," he said. "They're really not." She picked up her notebook. She tucked it under her arm. She looked at him standing in front of her in the mostly empty community center with his slightly crooked tie. And she thought about everything that had happened between the first time she had reached for that tie and this moment, and she let herself feel the full weight of it without editing any of it out. The grief and the fear and the cost of it. The things she had seen that she could not unsee. The testimony she had given that had been the hardest thing she had ever done, not because it was dangerous, but because it was true, fully and without comfort. And truth at that scale has a weight that does not lift entirely. And also the other side of it. Emily's treatment, stable and continuing. The 41 city employees who had answered for what they had done. The 371 workers at the transport companies who had kept their jobs and their pension rights. The hospital on the west side, where something had been prevented because a maintenance worker had seen something and known what to do with it. The woman who had just told her that her daughter moved through the world differently now. All of it together. All of it real. She looked at his tie again. Then she set her notebook down, reached forward, and straightened the knot. Her hands were steady. They were always steady now. 3 seconds, maybe 4. She adjusted the length and squared the knot against his collar and stepped back. "There," she said. He looked down at it, then at her. And the expression on his face was something she had first glimpsed 3 weeks into knowing him and had watched develop through letters and distance, and the slow, real, imperfect work of becoming accountable. Something that was not quite gratitude and not quite recognition, and was actually both of those things combined with something larger that she did not need to name right now. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "The work you're doing observable. Training people. Building the framework." He was careful with the words, the way he was always careful with things that mattered. Would there be a version of that work where someone with my specific knowledge of how organizations hide things could be useful? Not in charge, not as a figure of authority, just useful. She looked at him. This was the question she had not anticipated. She had anticipated several versions of this conversation. She had anticipated the simpler version, 2 people who had been through something significant together finding their way back to each other in the ordinary human fashion. She had thought about that version and decided how she felt about it and what she would say. She had not anticipated him walking into her lecture and asking to contribute to her work, to the things she had built. As a resource, not a beneficiary, as someone with knowledge that could serve the mission. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about all things that mattered. He knew how shell companies were built. He knew how legitimate businesses were used to conceal criminal activity. He knew how organizations recruited people and what pressure points they used and how the process of compromising someone's loyalty actually worked from the inside. He knew how surveillance gaps were exploited, how financial trails were obscured, how the administrative architecture of large criminal enterprises actually functioned. All of that knowledge turned outward rather than inward. All of that expertise pointed at exposure rather than concealment. It was, she thought, almost precisely what she needed and had not known she needed. "Come to the office Monday," she said. 9 o'clock. "We'll talk." Something in his face shifted. "Just talk. Just talk," she said. "We're very good at talking." He almost smiled. The same almost smile she had cataloged from the very beginning, the one that lived in the corner of his expression and cost him nothing to show if he let it. "Monday," he said. 9 o'clock, she said. "Don't be late." She picked up her notebook. She put on her coat. She said goodbye to the last two people in the room who had been studiously not watching this conversation with tremendous effort. She walked to the door. At the door, she stopped. She did not turn around. "Adrian." "Yes." "The tie looks better straight." She heard behind her the sound of a man who had carried the weight of 20 years of the wrong choices and was setting them down one by one, carefully, with accountability and without pretending the weight had never existed, allowing himself one small, genuine thing. She heard him laugh. She walked out into the city, which was enormous and complicated and full of people moving through it at every level, seen and unseen, and she walked through it as herself, not invisible, not performing, not holding any part of the truth back to protect herself from its consequences. She walked through it as a woman who had looked out a window at the right moment and chosen to say what she saw and had kept choosing that and would keep choosing it because the alternative was a kind of silence she had decided, once and completely, she was not willing to live in. The city moved around her, and she moved through it, and the story that had started with a burgundy tie and a gun in a coat pocket and a woman who was supposed to be invisible had arrived not at an ending, because real stories do not end. They accumulate and continue and compound, but at a truth. And the truth was this: courage does not begin in the people the world already watches. It begins in the ones the world has decided not to see. It begins in the moment someone who has every reason to stay silent opens their mouth anyway, because they have looked at the alternative and found it unbearable. It begins again every time that choice is made, and it belongs to anyone willing to make it. Claire Bennett made it on a cold Tuesday morning when she was holding a burgundy tie and watching a man load a gun 4 floors below, and she kept making it, and it changed everything, and that was enough. That was more than enough.